All right, campers, here we are again. Let me go here and close admin backstage. Presentation materials, portrait webinar, yes. So now go here. Everyone who's out there and watching right now, I just want to double check to make sure that everyone can see me. So if you go into the chat on the right-hand side of the panel, you'll be able to let me know. Here we go. Sergey's checking in. Nova Scotia. Yeah, tell me what you guys you're signing in from. I love this part of the webinar. It always amazes me at where people are coming in from. Switzerland. Wow, it's probably, is it late there? Susan from LA. All right, local. Northern Arizona. I just drove through there yesterday, Patrick. Good year. Netherlands. Patagonia. Holy cow. Hailing Island, Ingram. Bastrop, Texas. I went to school at UT Austin. Hook 'em. Germany, UK, Canary Islands. No way, that's a first. That's pretty cool. I've always wanted to go there. A lot of professional cyclists train in the Canary Islands, which would be great. Miami Beach, gotta love that. Poland, New Brunswick, Portugal, Austin area. That's pretty incredible when you think about it, which is always exciting for me to have this many people signing in. So I'm gonna give it just a couple minutes here, and then we're gonna start. I wanna leave at least 15 minutes at the end for questions, and I've already got some questions. However, please take advantage of the fact that we are live and you have chat. So if you have questions, start writing them in now in the chat so that I can get to them, because I have a list of questions already that's pretty long. And if someone sends one in through the chat right now and it looks really juicy, then I'm going to answer that question as well. All right, Coach Abampa, Bolivia checking in. I can't believe it. Hey, Miguel, nice to meet you. I love Bolivia. Went there many years ago, made some fun pictures while I was in your country. So anyway, one thing I wanted to start with, just to kill some time, but a lot of times people look at a person like myself in the position that I have at Blurb, and they think, oh, he probably makes books because he works at Blurb. And in fact, that's true, but I make books because I love to make books. And I've been doing this long before I was ever around Blurb, or Blurb was even an entity. And I just wanted to quickly show you just a few of the portrait-specific books I've made over the years. So this entire book is a series of portraits. That's number one. Number two, second portrait book, and you'll notice that there is not a portrait on the cover, and we can talk about why that is later. Then I have little teeny portrait books like this. I have a portrait book of only children's portraits, believe it or not. This was one of the first Blurb books I ever made. I have another book about athletic kids, athletic people, called The Guard. And perhaps one of my all-time favorite children's books and portrait book is a portrait book about my nephew. This little monster right here is now 12 years old. So this book is several years old now, but I make portrait books all the time. Portraits are such an integral part of photography, an integral part of being a documentarian, that it's, I can't imagine not making portraits. This whole presentation is going to be about this. We're going to break it down. There are some questions about things like posing that I'm not going to get too detailed in because it's too complicated, but we can talk a little bit about it at the end. But again, write your questions in case you have any. Get them in now so that I can at least get to them. So let's go ahead and get started into portrait photography. Just testing though. Anybody have a question so far? I'm waiting. I'm watching that chat. You better ask a question or I'm going to take it personally. Someone out there, anything. Give me a question about life. Nothing so far. I knew it. You're the silent masses. All right, we're starting. Portrait photography. Let me get my handy mouse here. So what I'm going to do initially is just run through about 6 portraits, just to give you an idea of the kind of portraits that I do and that I've done in the past. And just to give you a little heads up, I spent about a little over 25 years as a photographer, full-time working photographer. I shot portraits from day one, but I shot portraits as a newspaper photographer, a magazine photographer, commercial photographer, advertising photographer. But it wasn't until the last 5 years of my career that I was specifically a portrait photographer. And what I was doing at that time commercially was I was photographing children. And this was not something I ever thought I would ever do. If you'd asked me 5 years prior if I was going to be a children's photographer, I would have said absolutely not. But my neighbor had two beautiful little girls, and she brought them over one day and said, "Hey, you're a photographer, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, will you take pictures of my girls?" And I said, "No, I don't really do that." And she said, "Okay, I'm leaving them here." And she just left. And I turned around, and there were two little girls in this room that I'm sitting in right now. And I just started making pictures of them. And within 6 months, I was photographing kids full time, and etc. So what I'm running through here initially is just a couple of portraits, just to give you a sample of what I've done. This is my nephew, actually. He's 19 now, so this was probably at least 10 years ago. Shot with a Hasselblad square format on black and white film, which was sort of my favorite way of making portraits. And all right, hang on, let me go here. This is a photographer named Frank Jackson in Los Angeles. Again, these are Hasselblad portraits, so that's shot with 6x6 film and a Hasselblad film camera that's about 50 years old, about the same age as me. This is Stephen Alepa, who's a music producer in LA. It's a double exposure portrait, same thing, Hasselblad, very simple, just a roll of black and white film and a Hasselblad camera, which shoots a square, which I really love. This is a sculptor in New Mexico named Munson Hunt, who's just getting ready to fire up a flamethrower and basically blast her sculptures. Again, Hasselblad 6x6, all the same camera, the same lens, the same film, very basic. These are two kids in Arequipa, Peru, that I found in a neighborhood who were getting ready to go to a celebration. Again, basic, all available light. Again, Hasselblad square format. And this is a little boy in rural Panama, which I absolutely love. I mean, this kid is attending a soccer game, and he has got it going on. He's got his bag, his tank top, and his Pepsi. So I love this portrait as well. And anyway, these are just a sample of kind of what I do. Now, if you notice, these are a wide-ranging style of portrait, and we're going to talk a lot more about this in terms of the range of not just a portrait like this, but you can do environmental portraits, you can do all kinds of different things. So in essence, let's get started with what is a portrait. And a portrait is a painting, a photograph, sculpture, or other artistic representation of a person in which the face and expression is predominant. The intent is to display the likeness, personality, and even mood of the person, very key, whether that mood is good or bad, by the way. For this reason, in photography, a portrait is generally not a snapshot, but a composed image of a person in a still position. Portrait often shows a person looking directly at the painter or photographer in order to most successfully engage the subject with the viewer. I think that that's a really good description of portraiture. And we're going to talk a little bit later about a couple of the masters and how they sort of navigated this space of personality within a portrait. So before we go any further, just know that if you are, for me as a photographer, I see a lot of people, a lot of portfolios that are void of people, of humanity, right? Maybe you're a landscape person, or you shoot urban landscapes or whatever. I think that something changes. There's a significant skill level increase when you add people into your photographs, and specifically when you're doing a portrait where the person knows you're photographing them and you have to engage them. This is a psychological experiment. If you're new to it, don't sweat it, just practice. That is really the key. Portraiture is really about nuance, and it's about understanding the psychology of the person that you want to photograph, and it takes time and practice. But this is a pretty good definition, a pretty good place to start. Now, this has been part of our existence going way back. I just shot this in a place called Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, which was an 8th to 13th century Anasazi complex in a valley system, and there's pictographs and petroglyphs and everything on these cave walls. This has been around forever. So what you and I are doing with our DSLRs or our mirrorless cameras of 2018 is basically in consistency with what we've been doing as a species forever. So in my opinion, it is absolutely an integral part of being a human with a camera is to make pictures of other humans, for what it's worth. So one of the easiest ways, and some of these, what I'm going to say here pertains to some of the questions that I received that we're going to go over later. But these are pictures of my great-grandparents, and they were born in 1878, and this photograph was made in 1907. So it's giving you a little bit of history here. I think one of the easiest ways of breaking into portraiture is to start with the people you know best, which is namely your family. And I think actually, in addition to trying to learn how to make great photographs, family photographs I think it's a responsibility. If you're a photographer and you're the one in the family that's skilled behind the camera, you have a responsibility to record your family. I think this is a beautiful photograph. It's very posed, very staid. It was classic of the time. But I would be totally happy if someone made a portrait of my parents like this today, or myself today. This is a really beautiful thing, and it's preserved, believe it or not. It looks in incredibly good shape. So if we move forward a couple generations, these are my parents. That's my father on the left in 1944 with his dog Noodle. and that is my mother in 2nd grade. So again, I think looking back in family legacy and history, the portrait is an integral part of that. That is something that all of us should be doing. So my mother was always the family historian until about 5 years ago, and my mom looked at me, and I went to her cabin in the Texas Hill Country, and she said, "Look, I'm done, and I'm handing the baton or the torch to you, and it's your responsibility from now on to make pictures of the rest of the family. So all the nieces and nephews and grandkids and all that, it's on Uncle Dano to capture them." This is really critical. Start with your friends and family. And now to get even more personal, this is me looking pretty dapper, pretty excited. I'm guessing it's Christmas morning. I would not wear this, let's say, in July. I've got another outfit I like for July. But clearly, these square family photographs are the same thing that I'm shooting today. I'm photographing square photographs of my nieces and nephews today. But again, what I'm getting at with this is, again, the legacy of the family photograph, of the family portrait, but also the beginnings of what it feels like to be photographed. And this is, if you're going to make portraits, you have to understand what it feels like to be on the other side of the camera. We're going to talk more about that later. Here I am editing square photographs. This is probably 40 some years ago, and I'm still doing it today. And for any of you who are old enough to know a television show called Happy Days, there was a character called Fonzie. And I thought I was the Fonz, and that's my sister's pink bicycle that was called a Little Chick. But don't tell anyone that. It's not very macho. But I thought I was the Fonz, and my mom had this picture of me going like this, which is what the Fonz used to do. But anyway, again, this is a portrait just like a tight facial portrait would be, just a little bit pulled back. The portraits don't have to be any one specific thing. And then, yes, my high school yearbook photograph, which is sealed in a plastic evidence bag because a crime is definitely being committed with this photograph and the fashion and the haircut and everything else, although my current haircut would be debatably just as bad. But anyway, if any of you have been to primary school, secondary school, et cetera, you know what the portrait situation was like, and you know how uncomfortable it could be at times, and how you had to sit with your knees in one direction and your hands on your knees in the fake background. But again, this is sort of how the world views a classic portrait. At the time, it was a minor thing, but these days, these things have become like people are hiring hair and makeup and doing all kinds of crazy things. But your school photographs, we've all been on the other side of the lens, and it's something to really keep in mind. So who are the masters of portrait photography? Now, going back in history, we could go way back. There are a lot of people who were skilled portrait masters. However, I'm going to start with these. Josef Karsh would be the first person that I would look up, and it's Yousuf Karsh. He is in my opinion, the classic master of portrait photography. His lighting is unbelievable. He photographed a lot of famous people like Winston Churchill and others. Most of you will probably know Annie Leibovitz. She's an American photographer who is still working today, and she basically, starting with Rolling Stone probably 30 or maybe even 40 years ago, started shooting portraits of celebrities and musicians. She's still doing it. She is legendary. She's a household name as a photographer, which is a hard thing to do. The next person on the list is Irving Penn. And again, these are well worth your time to Google who these people are, because they are the critical masters. Most of the people working today have been influenced by this list. The next is Richard Avedon. And Richard Avedon died a few years ago, and he is, you've probably all seen many, many, many of his portraits. But the interesting thing about Avedon, and the one thing that I want to highlight about him, was that a lot of times portrait photographers are viewed as people who are trying to get their subjects to look perfect, look happy, look like the world is a rainbow of unicorns and flowers. But the thing is, that's not always the case. And apparently what Avedon would do was he would almost badger his subjects until the point where they kind of broke. And that's what he was waiting for. And then he would capture them. So he was looking for a specific kind of emotion. So a portrait doesn't always have to be shiny, happy, polished kind of thing. It's really about emotion. And if emotion is what you're after, and let's look at the range of negative emotions. All of this is valid as a photographic portrait. And lastly, let's talk about George Hurrell. And George Hurrell worked in the 30s and 40s, and he was a Hollywood photographer, and he was known for his lighting. So if you are someone who owns strobe lights or secondary lights, and you want to take these with you and photograph portraits in the field, look up George Hurrell. His Hollywood lighting is copied now by pretty much every single major director that's making motion pictures, and a lot of photographers. So wonderful guy. Again, the list here could go on and on and on. So submit, if you have any portrait photographers that you like, send them in the chat and I will see if I'll mention them or know who they are. Moving on, the basic ingredients of portraiture. Whoa, so, sorry about that. My computer just took a right turn, which I had never seen it do before. It was kind of alarming, actually. But basic ingredients of portraiture, I'm going to start with light. Now, the basic ingredients of portraiture, in a nutshell, are the same basic ingredients of any great photograph. And I'm going to focus on three things. The first being light. So when you're looking to photograph, light to me is the foundation of every single good image. When I'm working as a photographer, I am typically only working when the light is working to my advantage. I don't go out at 12 noon and try to make pictures. I work early in the day, late in the day. And if I'm shooting portraits, I'm only looking for the kind of light that I'm looking for. So people kind of think that I'm a little weird when I show up to do a portrait and I put all my stuff down and I just wander the property or wander the location. And what I'm looking for are little pieces of what I consider to be good light. So example of what you're looking at is a backlit condition. The light's pouring in from outside. It's bright 12 noon Los Angeles light, and I'm in the middle of a hotel room somewhere in like Hollywood, and the entire inside of the room is white. So the light is just bouncing around. It's absolutely gorgeous, perfect lighting conditions. As a photographer, when you get into a situation like this, your heartbeat starts to race because you know you're in a workable lighting scenario, and that's what it's after. Now, lighting is like your fingerprint. The kind of light that I like, that I'm looking for, might differ from what you're looking for, and it takes practice and patience to understand what it is you're after and then how to find that light. So this is a portrait I made of a very famous photographer named Douglas Kirkland, who's also an amazing portrait photographer, and he's been working for about 60 years. Now, you can't see his face, but this picture was not made for necessarily the general public. It was made for other photographers, and everybody who's a photographer who knows Douglas Kirkland knows the hair. And they know, even backlit without seeing his face, they know who this is. So I had the luxury of being able to not have to show detail in his face. I just wanted to highlight that hairdo. This, by the way, is a remarkable dude. He's 80 years old. Look up his work, Douglas Kirkland. He has done more photography, literally, maybe than any photographer I've ever met in my life, in terms of not only longevity of career, but diversity of career. Fantastic, great portrait photographer. This is a picture of Zoe Sadikirski, who's the Australian Book Designer of the Year. This was a picture I made very, very quickly on her patio outside of Sydney. It's, again, backlit. And what I'm looking for, if you look inside this picture and you see her profile, you'll see that her chin and her lips and her nose and the side of her and her forehead has a very a rim light on it. And that is what I was after. That's the one little piece of light within this photograph that actually makes this a workable photograph. So again, light being the first ingredient. The second ingredient is timing. Photography, if you go back to Henri Cartier-Bresson, the French photographer who was the founder, one of the co-founders of Magnum, his famous quote about photography was in reference to the decisive moment. The fact that the shutter is flashing at a fraction of a second, and you're able to catch actual moments. This is a photojournalist named Maggie Stieber, who's based in Miami. She was very influential in me becoming a photographer. She did a book called Dancing on Fire about the country of Haiti back in the 80s, and I saw that book and I immediately said, this is what I want to do with my life. And I've since met her many times and photographed her a few times and interviewed her, and this is her, like, me making some stupid comment and her laughing and me being ready to capture that moment. You can't fake this, you can't pose this, and I'm always a fan of, I think real moments in photography are far better than manufactured moments, especially with portraiture. This was a portrait of a guy who's racing a motorcycle in the California desert, and his bike broke down on the starting line. And his buddy, he had basically taken a left turn from the starting line, and his buddy had run over to push him out of the way so that other racers could go. Again, Hasselblad, black and white film. But look at the man's leg is off the ground, the posture. This is a real moment. And I was ready and waiting for this to happen. It wasn't like I saw it and said, oh, gee, I should have photographed that. I was actually ready to go. And this is a kind of portrait that I will call a grab shot portrait. So this was not posed at all. This is in Roswell, New Mexico at the UFO Festival. And I looked over and this guy was sitting on a bench and he had a space helmet and a disposable camera, and I shot 2 frames in about a second and a half. I consider this a portrait, but it's not a posed portrait. And this is for a lot of us who are wandering the world with a camera. We're not always in a structured environment shooting with lights and a studio and a controlled environment. We're basically trying to contain chaos in the field by making portraits. This takes a lot of skill and a lot of time, but it is more fun than anything you can imagine. So this is what I would call a grab shot portrait, and it's a good example of timing. And the last ingredient is composition. This is like your fingerprint. It can take you a long time to determine how you see the world photographically, but that's the fun part, is you get to practice and figure it out. This was a portrait of a guy on the street in Uruguay, Montevideo. And basically, I saw that diagonal on the wall, and I knew that that was an element that I wanted to include. And that's my composition, was to position him very, very low, and then let that diagonal line take your eye out of the viewfinder. And I'm just going to write a question down here because it's a good one that someone just sent in, which is about model releases, which we will talk about. This is another image that I shot about 5 minutes after the prior image, which is also in Montevideo. And my composition here is, you'll see I'm using this person in the foreground. He's very close to me. I'm shooting with a 35mm or 50mm lens, actually. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a foreground as the back of his head. The midground are the two faces on the wall, and the background is the wall itself. And so what I'm trying to do is build layering within a 35mm image, a two-dimensional image. I'm trying to build a three-dimensional look, and that's the composition. And this is something that I've practiced for many, many years, and that I try to do whenever I can. The thing is, again, remember, the beauty of this is that your composition, and I'm just going to read some names here, Paul's composition and Sergei's and Miguel's and Aran's and Patrick's, you guys all have different compositions. And the only way you're going to find out what yours is to ignore everyone else and everything else and go out and practice, because something will click and you'll say, oh my gosh, I finally figured it out. I know how I see the world. That's the fun part. Another example here, this was also in Uruguay, and I'm basically shooting a square again, that I'm positioning the person way down in the bottom of the frame, giving it a nice expanse up at the top because their face is actually looking up, so I wanted to give them space to view and breathe. And again, using a square format camera is a really fun experiment because you no longer have to worry about horizontal or vertical. Everything is square all the time. It's a really fun format to experiment with in terms of composition. And then finally, this obviously is kind of an odd crop, an odd composition. Again, this is a portrait, even though you cannot see his face. The part of him that I thought was interesting was not only the physicality of his body, but the necklace and the cross. That's what I wanted to highlight. Yes, did I make pictures where you can see his face? Absolutely. He had this gold cap on his teeth, which was amazing. But this was the portrait that I walked away with that I liked the most. It was dramatic. I actually ran this in the book across both pages with the gutter right down the middle of his chest, and it looks really solid. It looks good. So again, the reason I'm showing you a picture like this is to sort of let you know that it's okay to break the rules of portraiture. It's always good to break the rules of photography. There's a lot of rules, and it's a lot of fun to break them. But when you can break a rule with purpose, it's even better. So that when an editor or someone looks at your work and says, dude, why did you cut his head off? You can say, I did it because of X, Y, and Z. It's always good to have that. Okay, now the part that I know, everyone's favorite part. Everyone always wants to know about equipment. So the camera that you're looking at is actually my primary portrait camera, which is about a 50-year-old Hasselblad film camera. It's a very basic thing. All it is a metal box with a lens on the front. That is literally what it is. So it's super simple. It shoots a square format, but we're going to talk a lot more about it. So sorry, I'm looking at the questions coming in. Lots of camera and equipment questions. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. My secondary camera that I used for most of my career is a Leica rangefinder, which historically is not known as a portrait camera. It's really not. And so some of the pictures I've shown so far I did make with the Leica, but it wouldn't be my first camera to jump out at. There's a lot of better things. Most of your DSLRs, most of your mirrorless cameras, most of your medium format cameras are going to be better for portraiture than something like a rangefinder. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Again, there's my little beloved Hasselblad. By the way, I dropped this down the stairs at Machu Picchu, picked it up, and it was totally fine. Can't really do that with most modern cameras. So these old cameras are really fun, and if you've never shot film, it's totally worth experimenting. It might drive you crazy at first, but it is well worth the time and effort. And we're going to talk about chimping in a little bit and why that's such a bad thing, and you don't chimp with film cameras, and I'll explain. So the camera I'm going to leave up to you, but the lenses is where we get really important. So classically, historically, Portrait lenses are going to be from 50 millimeters and longer. So like I said, some of the portraits, the kid in Panama with the Pepsi bottle, that was made with the Leica and the 50 millimeter, but I rarely ever shoot portraits with a lens that's wider than 50. I typically use 50, 85, 135, or 70 to 200 zoom, something like that. Sometimes I've used longer 300s, 400s, etc. Most of the time you want a faster lens, and that means an aperture, fast aperture. So f2, f1.8, 1.4, 1.2, 1.0, etc. The lenses now are so fast, it's incredible. And the reason you want a faster lens is because you can create a shallower depth of field, and the background of the subject fades away. They call it fall off. And every camera and lens system has a different fall off. My favorite portrait camera, the Hasselblad, that 6x6 medium format, has a very distinctive fall off. When you see those images, you know they were made with a Hasselblad. Some people love that fall off and other people don't like it at all. So today you might be shooting a Sony or a Fuji or a Nikon. They all have a distinctive thing, but you want the faster lens and you want something longer than 50. Prime. Now I've never really been a zoom fan, and I know that most people today are using, a lot of people are using zooms, but I prefer prime lenses. I think a prime, which is a fixed, 50 or 85, etc., just less complication when you're shooting a portrait. And here's the other thing, not too large. And I'm saying this based as someone who's taught photo workshops and watched students attempt to photograph people they don't know. Now, this is a portrait and camera setup, right? This is a Fuji X-T2 with a 50 millimeter lens. Now, it's one thing to be photographed with this, or photographing a stranger. Hey, how are you? I'm a photographer, gonna take a picture. This, as opposed to this, right? This is scary. This is like a ginormous thing, right? You walk up to somebody with this and you're like, hey, can I take a picture? And they go, no, because it's intimidating, it's freaky. So I think the best thing to do is avoid trying to make pictures with these ginormous cameras and lenses. Use something small, something fixed, and something intimate so it doesn't overpower the person that you're trying to photograph. I'm just gonna take one look here because I know there's a lot of equipment questions coming in. Someone's asking me about the 80 millimeter lens on the Hasselblad, and if I wanted to go wider to get more context. I don't really do that. I had a wider lens on my Hasselblad once. I never used it. 80 is pretty much the only lens I would use. I do shoot portraits with 120 millimeter, and that is even tighter. But believe it or not, the 120 millimeter is often considered a lens that's too sharp for portraiture, because if the person has any imperfections or blemishes or whatever, it will all show up right there, front and center. But I don't use anything wider than an 80 on my Hasselblad. Okay, so moving on, that's basically equipment in a nutshell. And before we go any further, one rule, actually two rules, I lied. Don't snipe. I don't like to see people making portraits when they're standing on one side of the street and they're photographing someone on the other who doesn't know they're being photographed. There's a way of doing that, but sniping for pictures without the person knowing is not really a great way to go about things. And the second rule is don't chimp. And what I mean by chimping is, let's say that I'm photographing you, right? And I'm taking your picture and I go here and I photograph, and then I'm doing this, and then I stop and I start looking at the back of the camera and pressing buttons. That is a big no-no in portrait photography. The second you lower the camera and look down at the camera, you just broke the connection with the person you're photographing, and they see the top of your head. And I have watched models go from engaged to basically bored out of their mind while the photographers geek out on the menus and the previews on the back of the camera. That preview is only there, that window is only there for you to make sure that your camera is functioning properly. Don't ever look at it again while you're doing the portrait. You want to keep eye contact and conversational contact with the person that you're photographing. And just to give you an example, this was a guy that I found along the road in New Mexico, and I looked over and I really, really, really wanted to photograph him. And it was on private property, and I was a little bit paranoid, but I went up and I was able to like sort of talk to this guy, explain what I was doing. I had a Blurb magazine with me that allowed me to sort of hand it to him and say, this is what my project is, what I'm doing. And this was basically working through the idea of photographing this guy who's a stranger. And this was something, if I started chimping in the middle of photographing this guy, or tried to photograph him from across the road and he saw me doing that and I didn't have permission, it would have been bad, really bad. So what I did was left all the equipment in the car, got out, walked across with my magazine, said, hey, I'm sorry to trespass. I'm sorry to come on your property. I saw you. I really would like to photograph you. Here's my project, etc. And now we're buddies, and he helps me with my project. So there's a terminology thing that I want to go over. This is point number 6, taking or making. And there's a terminology. You might think this is trivial. It's not. So when I see amateur photographers or beginners or students talking about people and they see somebody they want to photograph, there's a verbiage that I think is very helpful that makes it apparent that you are not a hobbyist or someone who is a tourist who's looking to like take a quick snap, put it on Instagram and move on. I hear people say, can I take your picture? And I don't really like that when it comes to making a portrait. What I much prefer to hear people say is, can I make your portrait? And trust me, from having done this 1,000 times, when you walk up to somebody that you don't know and you say, can I make your portrait? It reflects back to a time when portraits were made with the paint and the easel and the brushes. People made other people's portraits by a painting. And it basically connects you with something that is far more than a quick hit. And instead of taking something from someone, you are making something with them. I also, on a secondary point here, I don't like when people talk about photos or shots. I think that trivializes what it is you're doing when you're making a portrait. And I think what you should refer to it as a portrait or portraiture. And I think, again, these are little subtle things that play into the psychology of the people that you're photographing. And when you say, hey, can I take your picture? I hope I get a sick shot. It makes you sound like an amateur. Whereas if you walk up to someone and you say, wow, I've been sort of observing you for a while. I'm a photographer. I would really love to make a portrait of you. It is a totally different reception. You're still going to hear no from time to time, and hearing no is awful. It feels terrible, regardless of how long you've been a photographer. It feels terrible. It happens to me all the time, and then I walk away and like sulk. But it happens, so don't worry about it. Okay, I just wanted to give you a couple of images of what it looks like when a real, quote unquote, real portrait is about to happen. And this was a little scene down in Uruguay at a slaughterhouse that had been closed down for decades. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I believe. And we found a man who'd worked in this thing for 40 years. He'd stood in the same place, in the same room every day for 40 years, and he was awesome. He was a very elderly gentleman in his 90s. There were 4 of us photographers working on the project, but I wanted to give you a little background of what a scene like that looks like. So this is the primary camera on a tripod. That's the man's face in the viewfinder on the back. Before we even brought him in there, we had scouted the light, the location. This is my friend Larry, who's sitting in as a model so that we can get everything right before Diego and Martine make their video footage and their portraits of this guy. So we're sort of testing the water because we do not want to waste the person's time that we're going to photograph. Now we've got him in position. The cameras are there. They're shooting both video and stills. They're interviewing him and talking to him. He's in a very comfortable place. This is the place, again, that he spent most of his adult life working. And so I am snooping around the sides. This is a portrait I made of him in profile. From the side, Hasselblad, Tri-X, available light, very simple. Again, but he is a part of the process. He's not a guy that just like sat down and we banged a picture out and went away. Lots of dialogue, lots of explanation, lots of collaboration and partnership. What do you think of this scene? How do you feel in that position? Would you like to turn in another direction? All this is a part of the process. And then again, now he's more familiar with me. He's more comfortable with me being there, which allows me to get closer and closer. So now he's holding his ID badge or his ID medallion that he wore. And he's okay with me because I've been around him now for a while. I would not have tried to shoot this picture initially. I would have started wider and slowly worked my way in. Okay, so there we go. Presentation is my prezo. I don't know why, but it's kind of hitching up here. Not working. Never a good sign here. Okay, so moving on to the next little scene again. This is a man that I saw in Uruguay. And I wanted to photograph him, but what I wanted were a picture of just those lips in red with the beard. That to me was the picture that I saw. So instead of just walking up to him and getting 6 inches away from his face, which would have been very uncomfortable, I started talking, I started explaining, and I started shooting, knowing I was working my way in closer and closer. So I started with this, and then I moved on, and I said to him, how about closing your eyes? And I think when a stranger is photographing another stranger, when you close your eyes, it almost makes it a little bit easier because you're reducing a little bit of the ingredients of the scene. And then finally, I got the picture that I wanted by getting in even closer, which I was able to do again by starting wide and moving in. I am literally about 6 inches away from him with the Hasselblad, which is weird and awkward for anyone. Doesn't matter who you are or how good you are. And just a quick scene again here, building a portrait. This is a portrait on the street in Panama City. I saw these 2 kids on their phone sitting on the wall with the skyline in the background. I knew that's the picture I wanted. So I started wide and I started snapping. Now I'm doing this because, believe it or not, they know I'm there. And what I'm doing is getting them accustomed to the fact that I'm making pictures. Even though I haven't spoken to them, they don't know me. They know I'm there. They can sense that I'm there. So I make this picture, then I get a little closer. I make another picture. I get a little closer. The focus is blown on this. It's not even sharp, but it doesn't matter because they know that I'm there and I'm getting closer to what it is I want. And then the last picture, which is what I wanted right here. And again, it wasn't like I just walked up without shooting and blasted this picture, because then they would have been like, whoa, what's going on? What's happening here? I snuck my way photographically in. Most of the time, not looking for somebody to be looking directly at me. But in this particular case, I'm okay with it. I think it's a very genuine look on his face. I think she has a great look on her face. I like the composition of the diagonal wall going into the distance that leads your eye to the skyline. I think this picture works, but that's how you build into a portrait on the street. Okay, strangers. I get a lot of questions about strangers. You have to talk to people. And if you're nervous about it, just get over it and go out and start talking to people. Because if you tell people what you're doing and how you're really focused and you want to get better, most people in the world want to help. They may say, no, don't photograph me, but hey, you should go see my brother. He's a total character. You have to do that. You also have to feel the scene that you're in. When you walk into a scene, sometimes you'll go, okay, everyone's okay with me being here. And other times you walk in and you say, uh-oh, people do not want me here. And that is something you learn over time. So you have to talk to people, you have to feel and listen what the scene is like. 3, you have to have a concise explanation for who you are. I'm a documentary photographer. I'm working on a project about the American West, and I'm using New Mexico as a representation of the American West. That's the line that I give people today when I'm working on the project that I'm doing right now. It's concise, it's simple, it gives them an idea of what I'm doing. If you fumble around and go, I don't know, I'm a tourist and walking around, they're not going to engage. You have to have a good explanation. And then finally, make them feel a part of the project. That this is not just some random snapshot that you're trying to build following on Instagram. This is something that's important to you, that's more than a snapshot. It's something that you are building as a career, as a, even if you're just your hobbyist, but like, I want to be the best person I can be with the camera, most people are going to engage with you. And just to give you an example, this was a project called Paradise, which was about all the towns in America called Paradise. There are 9 of them, 12 of them, I can't remember now. And this was a guy who was mowing his yard, and I pulled up in the car, and within 2 seconds, he literally lays this quote on me. I'm 69, but I've lived a real 69 years, drunk every day, smoking. My twin brother and I were rotten. We were honest but rotten. They didn't know, blah, blah, blah. He goes on. And, he saw me get out of my truck, and he looked at me and said, who are you? I told him, and he said, well, get over here and take my picture. So again, it started with dialogue, with feeling the scene, if it was okay to be there or not to be there. Same project, different town. This is Paradise, Utah. This was a guy that I saw along the road and got out, and within 5 minutes I was in his truck and we were driving around as he was doing his farming duties here, turning over hay. And again, it came from talking and explaining and sort of using the right verbiage to be able to make these portraits. And again, this is not a tight facial portrait, but this is what I would call an environmental portrait. Again, same project. This was in Kansas, and being able to talk to these people and say, look, I'd like to pose a portrait of you, etc. Same project in California. Again, pulling back a little bit, giving a sense of environment of who these people are, not just what they look like. And just to give you an idea of how far you can push this, and I'm not recommending you do this, but a few years ago, I had so many questions about photographing strangers that I didn't experiment. I said, I'm going to walk out into the world wherever I'm at. I'm going to see someone I do not know at all. I'm going to walk up to them, just straight up to them, and I'm going to say, number 1, can I photograph you? Number 2, will you tell me what you were thinking about the second before I came up to you? And 3, will you sign a model release? Now, I had no intention of ever using this work for anything, but I wanted to see how many people would actually sign a model release. And of all the portraits I made, which were many, 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 I had 1 person say no, and I had 1 person refuse to sign a model release. but every single other person divulged, in most cases, really intimate personal details of what they were thinking about before I approached them. So it's amazing what you can get away with if you approach people the right way and you explain the project and you are polite and you're professional. And this was a great portrait series. I would shoot one roll of film, color, on a 645 camera, and I used the contact sheet as one side of the spread and the portrait and their quote about what they were thinking about on the other side. Again, this is another same project, guy in Newport Beach, talking about how he missed the ocean and it reminded him of being at home. These are people at a Vietnamese festival in Southern California, etc. I don't know them. I'm just walking up and boom, they're telling me what's their private moments, and they're signing model releases. Okay, one of the things we've spoken about a little bit so far is environmental portraiture, the fact that a portrait doesn't have to be this, like a mugshot, it could be anything else. And I just wanted to give you an example of how I build a environmental portrait. This is a guy named Angel who's in northern New Mexico. This is the portrait that I ended up with, and I have a lot of portraits of him, but I want to show you what I photographed before I got to this point. And I photographed these subsequent pictures with him with me, and I was photographing, but I wasn't photographing him necessarily. So it started with the sky over where he was. Northern New Mexico sky is very unique. It started with what was underneath him, which was signs of agriculture, tractors, animals, etc. It started with the location where he spends most of his time, which is in the fields. The acequia, which carries the water to the field where he's working, which is what allows him to sustain himself as a human being, which is farming the land. The animals that are around him, this is the dog that was in the rows, and that's his grandson in the background. And then a little bit of him working. And I did all those before I got to the portrait. So he was very used to me before I said, can I get really close to you with this camera and lens and make an actual official portrait? This is another sample, which is in Panama. This is a story about the Panama Canal. And what you're looking at is everything except the canal. This is all the periphery of what is around something like the Panama Canal. This is basically environmental portraiture. This is taking pictures of what's, creating a portrait of an area. This is a project about Latin America with the church and the military. Again, I know this doesn't look like classic portraiture, but it is a version of portraiture. And this is a 3-picture series about my mother, and this is where she lives in Texas, and that's her reflected in the glass in the middle. But I'm sort of building a much broader context of who this person is than just what they look like. Now, point number 9, contests. There are a lot of contests out there about portrait photography. There's a lot of them, and many of them I'm not a huge fan of. I think it's always important to see who the judges are and what the prizes are before you enter something. But 2 that jump out at me that I really like is there's a portrait contest every year through Lens Culture, which is an organization. It's global, but I believe it's based in either Paris or Amsterdam. They do a really great job with their contests. I actually entered one this year for the first time in years and years and years, just to get an experience of what it was like, and it was wonderful. And also the Santa Fe photography workshops out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, they do a good portrait contest as well. So if you want to throw your work in the ring and just kind of see if there's what the reaction is, etc., or you want to win a prize, or winning awards is an important thing for you, these are 2 that I would look at. And finally, I want to emphasize something once again, which is it is really important for you to understand what it feels like to be photographed, to have your portrait made if you are going to go out and photograph other people. I, for one, have never really been super comfortable being photographed. I don't really like to have my picture taken. I don't hate it, but it's like, I just always feel kind of awkward. And so it's good on a routine basis to be photographed and to have your photograph. You could even ask another photographer to say, hey, look, let's practice with each other. And you'd be amazed the difference, again, between being photographed with something like this as compared to the giant thing, or just learning the dialogue and how to navigate around someone else, how to scout for lighting before you ask the person to pose. All these little subtle tricks that you use when you're making portraits. And it starts with being on the other side of the lens. So again, I've been around photographers who refuse to have their picture taken, and that's always a really strange experience for me, because you're asking a lot from other people, and so you should give it a shot. Now, the flip side of this, sadly, is that we are now living in the age of the selfie. So many of us are taking pictures of ourselves all day long, every day, and putting it on social. We're all social geniuses. We're all trending. So maybe that's helped bridge the gap a little bit. So that is the end of our little presentation. However, we have almost exactly 15 minutes left for questions. Now, some of you have been suspiciously silent in the question department. So I am going to start going through some of the ones that you guys have written in, and then I've also got a list in front of me. So I'm going to start with Patrick's question about model releases. And this is a question that I really hate having to answer. And Patrick, that has nothing to do with you. It's a totally valid question. We live in a very litigious society, a global society that's very litigious. There's often many misconceptions about what a photographer is doing, what the purpose is behind their work, and also what's the financial compensation. In many cases, most of the people making pictures in the world are losing money because they're paying to go where they are, they're paying for their equipment, and they're never getting those pictures used for anything or paid for. But the assumption on the street is that you're getting paid. If you have any commercial use or application for a photograph with a recognizable person, the safe bet is to say, yes, you need a model release. However, don't take it from me. I'm not a lawyer. There are lawyers out there who specialize in photographic law, and that's a great place to start. But the short answer is, if in doubt, yes, get a model release. And again, if you explain what you're doing well and why you need it, most people are okay with it. And you can do either a paper release, or now there's apps on the phone where you can have people sign, etc. It is a little weird getting people to sign stuff because I would be, obviously a little concerned as well if a stranger came up, but it happens all the time. So get a model release. I'd like to invest in a good camera. This comes from Abina, and she is looking for a good camera for a mom who loves to make new mom who loves to make photo books of him. So a mother with a newborn who wants to make pictures. A camera. What I would recommend. There are a lot of good brands: Fuji, Sony, Nikon, Panasonic. Whatever. I would start there. And I would look for something that's small that you don't mind having with you all the time. These new mirrorless cameras are really fantastic. They're half the size of the old cameras. They're small. They're super capable. And the price range is all over the place. So, Sony, Fuji make very affordable cameras that are very capable, and I would start there. All right, let me see here. Let me go to some of the questions that I'm going to bounce around here. Do you have any links to some of the books you created that you can share with us? Let me think about that. The only public books I have right now are a magazine series that I do, which I can share at some point. You can also just go to my Blurb page and just type my name and search Blurb, and you'll find 4 issues of the magazine that I do. That's probably the simplest thing. And then Les wrote in, can you do square photographs with an SLR? Les, sometimes the camera will allow you to actually set it up to capture square in the menus in the back. So it's all camera and model specific. So hopefully yours does. And you can set it up to capture as a square. All right, so moving on. Got some great questions here. I love this. Let's say, and I'm sort of paraphrasing this question here. The person is basically asking, what do you do when the person you're photographing doesn't want to be there? Let's say that you get an assignment to shoot a corporate portrait, and these are miserable. We've all done these. If you're a professional photographer, you've probably done these. A lot of times you're assigned to photograph someone who doesn't want to be photographed. I've done celebrities, they're tough. I've done professional athletes, they're even tougher, and they're not shy about saying, I don't want to be here, I don't like you, I don't like the setup, nothing. Or you could be talking about, like when I was photographing children commercially, oftentimes I would occasionally have to photograph an adult as well, and there was always a little bit of reluctance. This is where it becomes a psychological game. So when you're photographing someone who doesn't necessarily want to be there, what I do is I put the cameras down. And the dynamic is different between, let's say, a man photographing another man, a man photographing a woman, vice versa, etc. The dynamic always changes. But let's say that I have to go photograph a CEO and it's a guy who does not want his picture taken. What I do is I put my cameras down and I say to them, look, what we're about to do is incredibly awkward. You don't know me. I don't know you. I'm going to tell you to relax as I point this giant camera in your face and try to make something that looks natural, right? That is an impossible situation. But this is about acting. This is about him becoming something that you need for a very brief amount of time. And when you sit and you explain this and you're honest and you say, this is going to be really awkward, but we're going to make the best of it, it oftentimes diffuses the scenario enough to where someone says, all right, well, I can do this for 5 minutes. Because I guarantee you that CEO gets up in the morning and looks in the mirror and says to himself, I look great. And he probably poses. He probably turns from side to side and says, oh yeah, this is my best side. I look really good here. And he's never going to admit that to you. But if you can slowly get it out of him and make him think it's his idea, boom, then that's all you're looking for. You're looking for that split-second window where you're getting an honest interpretation of who the person is. So it takes practice, again, and some people are tough, and you're gonna walk away with something, a portrait that's not great, and you've done everything you can do, and you're still not gonna have something that's great. Failure is a wonderful thing. You figure out what you did wrong, what you could do better, and you go back and do it again. Oh, Kayla linked a current link to Dan's publishing projects on Blurb. Thank you, Kayla, so much. Christine is asking for a good lens for travel that would be good to take portraits on the fly without having to change lenses. Ooh, that's good. You want something small. Look, I think one of the great equalizer lenses is the 50mm. Now, again, it's on the short end for portraiture. However, they're small, they're fast, they're affordable. And the 50 is a really great lens for everything. Landscape, portraits, scenes. I use it, that is my primary lens I carry around on a daily basis, is a 50 f2. If you said to me, hey, we want to send you to Cuba for 10 days, I would be perfectly happy just taking this in a 50 and I would be fine. I wouldn't go wider, and getting a longer lens sometimes ends up being, you know, physically longer, and that can be a pain to carry around. Okay, so let's see here, what other questions? We talked about the visual elements that make a great photo, light, timing, and composition. Someone said, how do you practice without models? Would you photograph a mannequin? One, I think that's hysterical, so thank you for sending that in, but it's a good question. No, I would start with my family. I would start with people that I know, really good friends, and I'm gonna add a little caveat to this. I would start with the children of the families that you know. That's, I think photographing kids is wonderful because of a couple of things. They don't know they have a good and bad side. They are emotionally honest in a way that most adults are not. A child will, in a 5-minute span, laugh and cry and get really engaged in the portraiture in a way that adults typically don't. So I really loved my time photographing children, and I learned a lot that I have sort of used to try to spin into photographing adults. So start with your family, start there instead of the mannequins, because the mannequins can't talk back or tell you they don't want to be photographed. And if they do, it's a robot, and I would get away from it as fast as possible. Let's see here. Someone wants to know about background in portraits. I talked a little bit earlier about fall off. I think that's a good thing. Most of the time when you're shooting a portrait, your primary objective, especially if it's a classic sort of portrait, is to really utilize the face of the person or looking for a nuanced emotion. The background typically fades away. So that's what I would sort of keep in mind. Let's see here, portraits of kids, how to pose models. I love this. I'm going to answer this question just because it's completely random and off topic. And every time we do a webinar, someone asks one of these questions that's completely random and off topic. And I don't know who you are, but I love you for sending this question in. With book printing, should photographs be a little on the light side to print better? I can't say that specifically, but typically most people sit in front of monitors that are not calibrated. Shame on you. And they sit in front of monitors that have the brightness turned all the way up. Shame on you, double shame on you. So typically when they print their books, they can have a tendency to print dark because their density's off. So I guess in theory, you could lighten them a little bit just in general, unless you're working with a calibrated system and a calibrated monitor, then you wouldn't have to lighten your images. Oh, this is a great question. How would you rate the importance of knowing body language in portrait photography? Yes, I would rank that in the top 2 most important things. The top thing being arriving at the shoot on time. But yes, reading body language. You get out, sometimes someone might show up that got up that morning, said, I can't wait to be photographed. This is gonna be great. And then they got an fender bender on the way and they're not emotionally where they need to be. And their shoulders are slumped and they're kind of not, maybe they're squinting, maybe they have stress lines on their forehead, whatever it is. And it's your job as the photo psychologist to basically talk them down and get them engaged. So body language is a big deal when it comes to making portraits. Great question. Let's see here. Oh, Shelby. Oh, Shelby's touching on something dangerous here. What are your feelings about using social media to boost your profile as a photographer, and what advice would you give to get your portfolio out there? Wow, that's a little off topic, but let's say that you're a portrait photographer and that's what you want to do specifically. I mean, look, the world is on social media. Personally, I have mixed opinions about the whole thing. I think social media is about being liked in general, and I think sometimes as a photographer that forces people to make a certain style of image that's a likable image, but it may not be the style of portrait that they actually want to make. And when social media goes away, when Instagram is replaced by something and Facebook is replaced, you're going to be left with only your work. And if your work is not your work, you're left with nothing. So I'll give you an example. The portraits that I've shown you that were the black and white square, I was represented by an agency at the time that I was making many of those. And the agency told me, quote, whatever you do not send us black and white and do not send us square. And I said, no problem. And what did I send them for 5 years? Black and white square film portraits, because that is who I am as a photographer. I'm not them, I'm me. And so now I have a body, I have hundreds of black and white square portraits that I can look at and proudly put out and say, this is who I am as a portrait photographer. If I only did what they told me to do, I would have been left with nothing. I would have been left with what was hot in 2012 or 2011, and what was hot in 2011 wasn't hot in 2012, and vice versa. But I have a classic body of portraiture now, and that came from saying no, and that came from saying, this is what I want to do, not what social media is telling me to do. So that's my only boost. And in terms of getting your portfolio out there, start with making the best possible work you can, and make 10 images. Make 10 of the best possible portraits you can, and then go find 10 clients who you really, really, really want to work for, and spend the rest of your waking moments approaching those 10 and saying, this is what I do and why I want to work with you and why it makes sense for both of us, kind of thing. That's my advice. Okay, let's see here. We are almost out of time. We've got a question for a couple more. Let's see here. The last question on this was about learning more about environmental portraits. And how I view an environmental portrait is creating a puzzle. So the last piece of the puzzle, when you have the whole thing built, and then there's one little chip missing and the one little piece, and you're like, oh, here it is. That's the final portrait. The environmental portrait starts all the way at the edges when you're putting all the edge pieces together of the puzzle. That's where the environmental portrait starts. Think wide, moving in and in and in, and getting closer and ending up with the portrait. That is what I would say. All right, let's see here. Now, there's a lot of questions about posing. And that is a whole nother webinar. I mean, there are a lot of great seminars about posing people. I can't really go into it now. We don't really have enough time. But again, it comes with practice. It starts with understanding the light you want to work in, and then getting the person in the position that you want. But I'm a big fan of sort of letting people find a natural pose without me posing them. Because believe me, I've done plenty of pictures of like the person's just standing there frozen, and you're like, can you cross your arms? And they're kind of like, they're crossing their arms, but it looks really awkward and unnatural. Once you get through that enough and you've done this awkward thing, something will normally fall into place where the person will suddenly, on their own, without direction, will stand in a certain way, and you're like, that's who the person really is, and then you make your picture. So let's see. Oh, Miguel's asking about, is this video going to be online? Yes, it's going to be reposted on YouTube, where it will clearly go viral. I mean, that's just a slam dunk. And I think that brings us to the end. One last little quickie in here. Someone is asking about portable lighting. I rarely ever use portable lighting. I have many, many times in the past. I've had all kinds of different strobes and hot lights and things. The problem for me is I do not like to carry a lot of things. Now, one thing I would recommend is a portable reflector that folds up into a little case, and then you can unfold it. It'll be silver or white on one side and either gold or silver on the other side. And this is a quick way of bouncing and reflecting light. And you can literally have a stranger on the street hold it, or your partner or a friend or whoever. But if you find the light you want to work in, but it's not quite in the right location, you can use the reflector to bounce that light. You can use it to fill in people's eyes. It's a wonderful thing. It doesn't take up much space. I always have a reflector with me. And that would be my only portable lighting advice. So a lot of you were saying thank you, but it's me that should be thanking you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that there was something in here of value for you. I cannot recommend portrait photography enough. And I think that everyone should go out and give it a shot. Again, practice. Thank you, Abina, Suzanne, Michael, Patrick, Shelby, Kayla too. Why not? Thanks to the Blurb staff for tuning in, and we will be back in the next few weeks. We might potentially have multiple webinars here in October. So thanks for tuning in, and we appreciate it, and we will see you next time. Thanks.